just turn it into an organization that gives out block grants and have two Doge kids run it out of the back of a van.
Well, you wouldn't want that, but what you're talking about
Well, why not?
is the
Welcome to Real Clear Politics for Thursday, March 6th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Guys, it is hard to keep up with President Trump when it comes to tariffs. This is the latest, as I know it. He has postponed a 25% tariff on most goods from Mexico for a month. He's carved out some tariff relief for U.S. automakers. He is reportedly considering doing the same for agricultural products. No word yet on tequila or avocados. But Tom, the markets are confused. Our partners are confused. I'm confused. So do you understand what's going on here? Tell us about
it. I just know Carl's disappointed in that there's no carve out for tequila or avocados. It's very disappointing to him. Yeah, look, it's a mess. It's a messy policy. And this is one of the things that, Trump, he's worked himself into this place. Again, initially threatening to use tariffs to modify some behavior. That was, I think, largely successful. And then pushing forward with tariffs on, two of our largest trading partners and getting some pushback on that. And, we talked about this. He even said at the State of the Union, look, there's going to be some, some bumps and people are going to have to bear with him on this. But I think the administration's under such pressure that now it's just they're trying to do what they can to ad hoc, make this roll back some of these tariffs in as much ways they can, because it's too much of a political liability. And they've seen the market going down. They've seen pressure from allies within their coalition. You mentioned farmers, union workers, and working class folks in the Rust Belt. So it's a problem, and they're trying to rectify it, but it comes across as just totally chaotic and as I said, kind of a mess.
Yeah. Carl, do you see any pattern here that we should discern that maybe we're missing?
Well, we might not have been taking Donald Trump literally enough. What was that great line that Selena Zito had? His supporters take him seriously, but not literally, and the media takes him literally, but not seriously. But he said tariffs was his favorite word. Maybe he just likes saying it. So he he says, we're going to have tariffs. We're not going to have tariffs. We're going to delay the tariffs. And there's a constant in this policy. He keeps saying the word tariffs. So I just think he likes talking about it. I don't have any other theory.
Yeah. Well, Vice President Vance, he was on the southern border yesterday. He said this. He said, a number of industries have reached out to us to ask for exceptions to the tariffs. But then he went on to say Trump wants tariffs to apply broadly. He doesn't want to have 500 different industries getting 500 different carve-outs. But Tom, that does seem exactly to be what's happening. And if you look at the sort of history of tariffs in this country, at least, that is what happens. Lobbyists pressure for preferential treatment, and politicians claim that certain industries are strategic and need more protection than others. The whole thing becomes very swampy. It's great for lobbyists in DC, but maybe not so good for anyone who can't afford to lobby about about tariffs. The New York Times had this piece saying that there are two voices giving him conflicting advice. There's Howard Lutnick, the former head of Cantor Fitzgerald, who is a commerce secretary, and Peter Navarro, who's a senior counselor to the president. He likes tariffs. Lutnick is more of a moderate. Is that part of the explanation here, that he's just listening to two different, an angel on one side and a devil on the other, or depending on who you think is the angel and the devil?
No, I think Trump does like tariffs, and he does see tariffs as something that is an effective tool, and he thinks that the elites, the elite economists in Wall Street have it all wrong and have been wrong about tariffs for decades. That being said, Trump is also very pragmatic and transactional, and he understands the politics of this. He's kind of gotten on the wrong side of it. And the problem with, you get on a slippery slope real quick when once you grant an exemption to an industry, then you invite all these other, well, why did they get one and I don't? Why do automakers get one and we don't get one? And suddenly you're besieged by people, as it looks like the administration has been, of people wanting their exemption. They want their carve out, and the thing devolves very quickly into a complete mess. And that's the third time I've used that word, so I should probably stop. But it's kind of what it feels like.
Kind of what it feels like. Well, Carl, the markets, as I said earlier, don't like this at all, and our trading partners are confused. And I feel for anyone who is trying to price their goods right now, or anyone who's trying to plan. There's reports that gas prices in the Northeast are going to go up 30 to 40 cents a gallon if the tariffs go through on Canada. This is what I guess is part of the problem. It's not just that we have tariffs maybe coming. It's that nobody knows what it means. So if you're a business person, it's very difficult to plan.
That's right. And look, these estimates you see, I mean, they're guesses. No, but they're educated guesses. President said he was asked about specifically the province of Alberta. I mentioned this at the time last week because Alberta is Canada's Texas. Trump's popular there. If Canada's not going to be the 51st state, but if any one province in Canada was going to be, it would be Alberta. And they send a lot of, fossil fuels, gasoline, oil, shit, and he said, we don't need their energy. And that was a sign that this is ad hoc. And, you meant you know this, Andy, the markets don't like protectionism per se, but they also don't like uncertainty. It's this uncertainty that you and Tom are talking about that I think is giving Republicans, and especially in these energy states, pause, because that's not what they thought they were getting. It's not decisive. It's not informed. The president hasn't, he doesn't really do this. He doesn't. Jimmy Carter did it, and Bill Clinton would do it. Presidents both successful and unsuccessful. They'll take an issue that's important and give a speech about that issue and explain what they're doing. He hasn't done that on tariffs. He hasn't ever really said in one place why he likes them so much. We've, done reporting. I've done reporting. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I went to Canada to give a speech. And so, immersed myself in all the things Donald Trump has said about tariffs over the years. And there's certain things he likes. Tom mentions behavior modifications. President Trump talked to Justin Trudeau this week, and he expressed bitterness at the tariffs, the protectionism that Canada places on American dairy. So one thing is and he said this, he wants to lower barriers to our products. The other thing is he clearly relishes the money it brings in, because it's a significant amount of money to the that comes into the United States Treasury when you have tariffs. And the other thing is he thinks it'll encourage investment here. So you could lay out a plan for that, but it defeats his purposes, I think, when it comes across as chaotic and ad hoc.
Yeah. Well, Tom, Larry Kudlow, Steve Moore, a couple other people have said that the sequencing on this is backwards, that what Trump should have done was go ahead with the tax cuts, got those in place, unleashed the animal spirits, as they like to say about the economy. And then as the economy was sort of growing and maybe inflation was coming down, he could sort of move into the tariff territory. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they're right. I mean, but logistically, tariffs are something that he can do by himself. He can't do the tax cuts without Congress. They need to get that through both chambers of Congress and get it to his desk, and that's going to take time. And so I think he's, it's not like Donald Trump to sit and wait around for Congress to get something done when there's an option available to him right now. So that's the path he's chosen, and I don't know whether that was the smart path or it would have been smarter to do it the other way around.
Yeah, Carl, what happens next?
Well, he seems like this. He's in a hurry, doesn't he? You guys, I mean, he's the phrase "young man in a hurry." Here's a not young man in a hurry, and he's acting like he wants to get all these things done immediately. My guess is he's going to continue to jawbone with these foreign leaders. He's going to declare victory and go home.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And guys, yesterday, 4 sanctuary city mayors faced off on Capitol Hill with the House Oversight Committee. They were Boston's Michelle Wu, Chicago's Brandon Johnson, Denver's Mike Johnston, and New York City's Eric Adams. They went there. They explained their policies. They responded to a bunch of questions. It was about 6 hours of testimony. Carl, how do you think they did?
Well, they're all Democrats, although you wouldn't know it by how the Democrats attacked Eric Adams. And they have a story to tell, and their story is that we are a nation of immigrants. That these people are being, the resources are finite. They don't want to spend a lot of city money rounding up people who are here constructively working and supporting their family. And they told those stories, and they used individual examples of people. And so did the friendly members of Congress who talked to them. What the Republicans talked about was horrific crimes that have been committed against immigrants. And I didn't think, this is subjective, but I didn't think they handled that very well. And I don't know how you could. These are terrible stories, and they either sound callous or uninformed. It's hard to strike the right balance there. I thought they struggled to do it, but I certainly understand why they did, because what are you supposed to say to these families who lost people by these immigrants? One thing they said, it's a talking point, is that immigrants commit crimes at a far less rate than Native American people. Well, there's been a couple of studies. They're old. The data isn't very good. And that was talking about legal immigrants. These are illegal immigrants. The data in that is no good. It's a talking point. They keep repeating it. It was on CNN the next day, this morning. I don't think most people buy it because there's no way to know if it's true. And I rather doubt that it's true.
Tom, what'd you make of the hearing?
Well, I'm glad that all of America got to see our mayor from Chicago. See what we're dealing with. The funny clip that Nancy Mace, she's asking for a yes or no answer, and he starts saying, and she said that's why you have a 6.6% approval rating, because you suck at answering questions. I had to chuckle at that one. Look, and he tried to. There was a report out today, and Brandon Johnson has been steadfast in his defense of not only being a sanctuary city and accepting all of these illegal migrants. And there was a back and forth. He tried to, these were bused to us from Texas. This is Governor Abbott's problem. But we've taken them in, and he has said that he is never going to be ashamed or shy away from the fact that Chicago is a welcoming city, and we're going to take, we just had a report come out that the city since 2022 has spent $650 million in vendor contracts to house illegal migrants in the city of Chicago. Last week,
that's pretty welcoming.
Last week, Brandon Johnson forced through his city council a $380 million bond that is, by all accounts, we make no payments for 2 years, then we pay interest only for like 8 years or something. It's going to end up costing the city and taxpayers of Chicago $2 billion when all is said and done. And he did that to cover shortfalls that the city has in its budget. So you take those two stories and you put them together and you think, what could the city of Chicago be doing for its residents who are here legally, the services that they could provide, the repairs and all of the things that they could do to make this city awesome, which it is. It's one of the great cities in America. But instead they've spent that money on housing illegal immigrants. And Brandon Johnson, he that's a hill he's willing to die on, and he is dying on it politically, as is evidenced by his abysmal approval rating.
Yeah, speaking of money, there is this story from the Boston Herald that Mayor Wu spent $650,000 on a New York law firm to prepare for this single hearing. She brought a dozen staff members with her to Washington. That was an additional cost. Carl, I'm not sure the good people of Boston are getting their money's worth, but it did seem that she did pretty well in these hearings. That was my impression, at least.
So
What
we're
was yours?
shilling for media consultants now. Yeah, okay. She did better than the Harvard president who lost her job. Maybe it's if you're a politician, it's maybe money well spent. I don't think the taxpayers ought to have to pay it. It probably ought to come out of campaign funds. But you remember those 3 college presidents who showed up? They actually had some lawyer. They sought lawyerly advice, but they didn't get the super deluxe media training that these mayors got. And look, I thought Michelle Wu, I mean, it started with, that very large cross. It was Ash Wednesday on her forehead. She started by saying she was the daughter of immigrants. And I mean, she's the American story. She didn't sound like a wild-eyed socialist yesterday. She sounded like a mayor who cares about people. And that's what that money gets you. It gets you a good presentation.
Well,
Andy.
Yeah, she cares about wasn't she the one who just offered condolences to the person, the attacker who was killed
who the
by
police shot?
Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah, she
Tom,
wasn't having a great
She
week.
cares about the wrong people.
No, she said she cared about the victims too. She cares about all people. She says
Right.
they don't want to lose when any life is lost. That's a sad thing. And during, the beginning of Lent, it's a very noble thought, comes
Okay.
directly from Catholic social thought. I've mellowed on that in 24 hours since we first talked about it.
Okay. All right.
Well, Carl, talking about democratic messaging a little bit, your friend, Gavin Newsom, has a new podcast. He was on with Charlie Kirk, Republican activist, the other day, and they talked about gays. I'm sorry, not gays. He talked about trans women in sports. What did he say, and what did you make of it?
Well, they talked about a lot of things. It was a long interview. I think they did it. Was it Tuesday? They released it excerpts. They released it Thursday morning. Gavin Newsom. We're talking about mayors. He was mayor of San Francisco, and he married. He officiated at the marriage of hundreds, maybe thousands of gay couples when it wasn't legal. The California Supreme Court later overruled him. This is more than 20 years ago, and he's got. I think he's the godfather to a transgender person. He gave a toast at their wedding. I mean, he is the Democrat whose bona fides on LGBT issues is perfect. But he said he won't go there. Transgender biological males playing in female sports. He said it's a simple question of fairness. And this is what we talked about this earlier this week on this show. It sounded like he had been listening to us. And Gavin, remember we said a lot of these people putting out these talking points to the Democratic Party, Denver played athletics. Tom and I talked about that. Well, Gavin did. He was a star basketball player and baseball player in high school, good enough in baseball to play 1 year at Santa Clara. He got hurt and never went back to it, but the University of Santa Clara. And he was a star guard on a very good basketball team in Marin. And he just said, and he said it 2 or 3 times, it's just simple fairness. And despite what happened in the Senate, that's a winning message for a couple of reasons. One is it's an 80% position, and 2, it's true. And so I'm willing to, Tom has been needling me that I won't willing to say that Gavin is running for president. But if you're seeking national office, Gavin Newsom has now staked out a place where you could actually run for office and have a reasonable chance of success.
Tom, people are saying that this podcast is his way of launching his presidential bid, which Carl's been waiting for with bated breath for quite some time, I think.
Yeah. I look, the fact that he sat down with Charlie Kirk and had an extended discussion with him, I think is great. And I listened to, different clips of it. I haven't listened to the whole thing from start to finish, but the clips that I listened to were really interesting. I mean, it was interesting to hear those two go back and forth. And there was this discussion about how Gavin Newsom's 13-year-old son is a huge Charlie Kirk fan and wanted to stay home from school so he could be there during the podcast. And Gavin Newsom was like, no, he went to school and And Charlie Kirk said, "You closed down schools for 2 years. You couldn't do one day for this kid." So it was, look, it was interesting. It was engaging. I think we could use more of that. And so I kudos to Gavin for being willing to sit down with conservative folks and get into it with them. I do think that, look, was this a Sister Souljah moment for Gavin Newsom? Maybe not quite. But given what happened in the Senate earlier this week, it does stand in stark contrast to where the Democratic caucus is. And so in that sense, he has staked out a position that's a little different. And again,
he also said something interesting about Kamala Harris, and it was related to this. Charlie Kirk asked him about that ad that Donald Trump ran, the Trump campaign. The Democrats are for they, them. Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump's for you. And the governor said it was a devastating ad. And what was more devastating is she didn't even respond to it.
Right. Yeah, no. It's
gotta be fun. And remember, those two have a history. They grew up in San Francisco politics together.
Yeah,
they've known each other. They've known each other since they were in their 20s. That they're frenemies, and as Tom points out, natural rivals.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that Gavin Newsom, when Joe Biden, after that debate, and I was standing right there in Atlanta when Gavin Newsom came out and basically stood up for Biden and said, and he threw his lot in with Biden to try and keep him in that race, because he did not want to see Kamala Harris, his rival, be sort of elevated to the top of the ticket. But yeah, I think he's running for president. I think this is a good idea for him. It's a good platform. It allows him to stay in the conversation. I mean, he's going to make a lot of viral clips like this that are going to go forward. And to the point that we're talking about, it allows him to stake out positions and talk about and criticize different aspects of the Democratic Party, and do so in a way, I think, that gets him a little bit more to the center, which is where he's going to need to be if he wants to be president.
Yeah, well, okay. So quick poll here. It sounds like Tom says he's running. I say he's running. Carl, are you ready to say that Gavin Newsom is running for president of the United States?
I'll go one step further. I'll say he's the next president of the United States.
Oh my God. There you go. Well, there's some news for you folks. Oh God. All right. Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. We're going to take a break and be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And guys, it looks like President Trump may actually make good on his campaign pledge to eliminate the Department of Education. There's this draft executive order that says, in part, and I'm quoting, "The federal bureaucratic hold on education must end. The Department of Education's main function can and should be returned to the states." So, Tom, this will be challenged in the courts, but it looks, as far as Trump is concerned, that Linda McMahon, who was confirmed on Monday, her job is to turn off the lights and close the doors. Is this good politics, and is it going to happen?
I don't know that it's going to happen, because I believe it takes a vote of Congress to do this, and they need 60 votes in the Senate. They only have 53. So unless they get 7 Democrats to go along with it, it seems like it's unlikely. But I think it is real in the sense that, and we talked about this before, how this has been a promise that many Republican candidates for president have made, either in the primary or in the general election, and wanting to get rid of this department altogether. And so in that sense, I think Trump is actually moving the ball down the field on that. The reports in this were, folks were saying, cautioning that this could change, and the details are, not all there. But the fact that it continues to be a news story, and that they have made this draft, tells you that there is something to it. And who knows? In 2 years, if Republicans manage to win a few seats in the Senate, it actually could become reality if they can ever get to 60 in the Senate.
Yeah. Carl, could you just shrink the Department of Education and just turn it into an organization that gives out block grants, and have 2 Doge kids run it out of the back of a van?
Well, you wouldn't want that, but what you're talking about,
well, why not?
is the way that this could work. I mean,
I got to hold up my little paddle, Andy.
Tom's scenario, Republicans getting 60 Senate seats, that could happen. But if that seems unlikely to me, the way you do this, and neither Elon Musk nor Donald Trump have showed this kind of patience yet. But what you do is what you just said, Andy. Congress still appropriates the money. You wouldn't try and do it in 1 year or 6 months or 6 weeks. You would drastically reduce the federal budget for the Department of Education. And then you do it again the next year until the Democrats sued for peace, because they want this money to go to the communities. And if you said, okay, we will appropriate money for education, but we're getting rid of this department, you start to see that maybe then you could have a deal with the Democrats. All right, we're going to lower this thing. It's not going to be cabinet rank anymore, but we're still going to give block grants to the states, and we'll restore funding to levels that were higher than we're prepared to do if you keep the Department of Education. Now, it's kind of a game of chicken. But if they wanted to take 2 or 3 years to do it, that would be one approach.
Yeah. So, Tom, it's about 10% of the education budget nationally comes from the federal government right now. But I don't understand why Trump could, it seemed to me, take it out of the cabinet. That's his choice. That's not.
No, that was a legislation, Andy.
Really?
You created a cabinet.
What if he just doesn't invite him?
Well, you don't have to invite him to the cabinet meetings, but Jimmy Carter ran in 1975. He promised the teachers unions in Iowa that he would create a Department of Education. He won the Iowa caucus, and the teachers unions were his strongest backers. And when he became president, he delivered on this promise. And when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980 and defeated Carter, he said, well, we'll get rid of it. But he didn't spend any capital or time thinking about that once he became president. This president really does seem to think it's important. He has antipathy for that. He said during the campaign, I can't wait to get rid of that agency. So this has a sense of urgency for him that it's never had for any other Republican.
I guess my point is that he has a choice as to whether or not he treats it as a cabinet level agency.
Well, that's right. That's right. But the money's the big thing. If you want to lower its footprint in Washington, you have to cut its budget.
Yeah. But Tom, it does seem to me also that it's a lot of money. It's a lot of power over policy, over education. And this president doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would like give away that power. So wouldn't he want to be able to control how the money is spent in order to make changes in the way trans athletes are in women's sports, for instance, which is an issue he's talked about, using federal money to affect that decision at the state and local level.
Well, Trump certainly does recognize the power of as you could say, the purse, in terms of you can call it blackmail, you can call it whatever you want, forcing people to do what they want. And look, lots of presidents have done this, tied funds to local communities in terms of getting them to sort of do their bidding. Otherwise, they'll be, the funds will be withheld. But I think overall, Trump, his bigger vision is shrinking government, right? This is DOGE, this is everything. It's across the board. It's the Pentagon, it's everywhere. And again, the education department is one that is not only a relatively new department, but I think in the eyes of a lot of conservatives, it's a department that doesn't really merit as much money and power as it has at the federal level, and they just as soon see it gone. So that Trump's trying to make that happen, or at least, to Carl's point, maybe shrink it, the size and scope of it. And that would be a win in the eyes of conservatives as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Jay Bhattacharya for a second. He was on the Hill yesterday. He is Trump's pick to head the NIH. And he's talked to on the Hill about what he's talked to us about as well on this program, the need for free speech when it comes to scientific research. He said in part, and this is the quote, "Science to succeed needs free speech. It needs an environment where there's tolerance for dissent." So, Carl, what did you make of Jay on the Hill yesterday? It is a remarkable comeback story, if nothing else.
Well, yeah, Dr. Bhattacharya was a well-respected Stanford professor in the field, but he dissented from the orthodoxy that was pushed by the Biden administration and by his predecessor at NIH, Francis Collins. and they tried to marginalize him and silence him. And it's incredible. He now has that job. He said two things at this hearing. What you said, Andy, about free speech, and he went on. He said that at NIH he wants to create a culture of respect for free speech in science and scientific dissent at NIH. And he said, and then he said, over the past few years, top NIH officials oversaw a culture of cover-up, obfuscation, and a lack of tolerance for ideas that differed from theirs. And like I say, he came by that honestly because he was the receiving end of that. The other thing he said that might be more, beyond censorship, that in the purely science realm, is that he wants to focus on he called it the chronic disease crisis. And that dovetails with what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to do at HHS. So you have this different approach. He's going to, not control all the information and also focus on this other area. So I think it's exciting. I like Francis Collins, but this is kind of a breath of fresh air to have Jay Bhattacharya there. And we maybe in full disclosure, as they say, we gave our organization, Real Clear Foundation, associated with us, gave Jay the Samostat Prize, one of the last year, the first annual Samostat Prize that goes to people who stand up for censorship, or who stand against censorship.
Thank you. Yeah, a little clarification. Tom, what'd you make of Jay's testimony, and are you pleased that he's at the NIH?
Of all of Trump's picks, I think this was the best. I mean, I have so much respect for Dr. Bhattacharya, and when you see him and you listen to him talk, he's the most thoughtful, reasonable, measured, unflappable, sort of no nonsense guy. And he's not a partisan. He was not,
I don't even think he's a Republican, Tom.
He may not even be,
Yeah,
but you talk to him about science and you can't tell, and it doesn't matter to him. He wants truth and honesty, and the fact that he was retaliated against and censored. I think putting him in this position is just, I think it's a great decision because, and they talked about this at the hearing, his job is to restore trust to these agencies, which were really, really damaged. The last administration, Francis Collins, Anthony Fauci, the Biden administration, they did serious, serious damage to public trust in these institutions. And he's got a tall order to try and restore. But if there's anybody who can do it, it's going to be Jay.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you guys said. I had the pleasure of meeting with him and interviewing him on this very program. So
no more gain of function research, gentlemen.
That is true.
No more gain of function.
I was just going to say, the thing about him, about free speech too, is he doesn't just value it in science; he values it across the board. And it was really important to me that he, or maybe important's not the word, but it was significant how he broadened that what he saw in science and could apply it to our country as a whole, and the need for free, unfettered speech and good, robust debate across the board, which is something we try to do here on the show from time to time. So that's
when Carl lets me.
When Carl lets you, right? You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. When we come back, Tom's going to talk about Bud Light. Pretty interesting stuff coming up. Don't go away.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Anson Frericks. He is the author of a new book called Last Call for Bud Light: The Fall and Future of America's Favorite Beer. Anson, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Hey, Thomas, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
So everybody knows the story of Bud Light, at least the most recent story. But you talk about in the book how all of the things that sort of led up to this moment, the decision that was made to do this partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, this all started years before that by the change in the corporate culture. Can you walk us through that and explain that in a little more detail?
Yeah, definitely. So everyone knows the Dylan Mulvaney story. I think what this book really goes into detail in is that this was really, almost 15 years in the making. A lot of people don't realize that Anheuser-Busch, for example, is no longer an American-owned company. In 2008, it was bought by a European company called InBev. And then over the next 15 years, you really saw the company really change from the sort of great American iconic company owned by the Bush family, been owned for almost 4 generations or managed by the Bush family for 4 generations. And then that really changed. Over the next 15 years, you had this new European ownership group with this InBev company, brought in its own managers from Europe. They moved the headquarters, the sales and marketing headquarters from St. Louis, Missouri, where Anheuser-Busch had always been, moved it to New York City. Hired very different people in New York City, hired different marketing agencies in New York City, did different partnerships in New York City. Also as well, they adopted sort of this new kind of corporate, I would say, purpose, which was no longer around focusing on shareholders and shareholder capitalism like we had in the US for a long time since Milton Friedman in the 1970s. But in really the 2017, 2018 timeframe, adopted this more European stakeholder capitalism model, which is based kind of on the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum view of the world, that businesses are supposed to serve all stakeholders. And then downstream of that got involved in a lot of ESG, environmental social governance, and then DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion policies that all sort of manifested itself with not only the Dillon Mulvaney partnership, but then I also think the company's bungled response to it, where they could not clearly articulate who Bud Light was going to serve as a customer moving forward.
Yeah, and when did you join the company again? It was like 2011? Is that right?
So 2011. So I joined the company after this company InBev had bought Anheuser-Busch. And even InBev, they have a whole history. It was really, originally it started as a roll up in South America, where this group of Brazilian bankers kind of rolled up South America. Then they bought Europe, the company called InBev, which owned Hoegaarden, Stella Artois left. Then they bought Anheuser-Busch. They recruited me to the company based off this promise of meritocracy, and also that we needed more American leaders that could understand the beer business and help them really grow the business in the US. I think that part of that was true, but unfortunately, I think sort of the culture of this more European kind of firm unfortunately overtook sort of Anheuser-Busch, and a lot of the values from Europe came and overtook a lot of the American values over the last 10 or 15 years. And I left really a year before the Dillon Mulvaney partnership to actually co-found a company called Strive with a friend of mine named Vivek Ramaswamy. And our whole idea was to originally invest only in businesses that were going to be focused on their shareholders, focused on their customers. And so really it was kind of this, my worlds collided when I had started a company called Strive to actually focus customer or businesses back on their customers. And then Anheuser-Busch became, I think, the poster child of everything that went wrong with, call it the stakeholder capitalism, ESG and DEI movement in America.
So I guess you're going to be voting for Vivek in the Ohio governor's race since you're in Cincinnati.
I was, I was at his kickoff event a week ago, and I like his policies. If he can get us to 0 state income taxes and 0 property taxes in Ohio, I'm on board with that.
But I was going to ask you, so you were really there and watched the ESG and the DEI stuff sort of blossom inside of one of the largest companies. As you said, it's a European company, but did all of that really accelerate after 2020? I feel like there was a moment, or was it even earlier? I know in 2017, we had this, when Trump first came into office in January 2017, I remember talking about CEOs, there was the quote unquote Muslim ban, and all these CEOs, they were being pressured, and they started releasing statements, and they started taking positions on social issues, which I had never seen before. And I thought to myself, why would they be doing this? They're going to be out there, putting a stake in the ground that may end up alienating, half of their potential customer base. It didn't make any sense to me, but obviously that's what happened. And Bud Light obviously got caught up in that.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't make any sense to me either, but I think some of the seeds of that were actually sown really in sort of the 2008 financial crisis. And if you recall that there was a lot of banks that got bailed out, whereas people felt that mainstream Americans, they lost their houses in the subprime mortgage crisis, and a lot of banks got bailed out. There was this whole Occupy Wall Street movement that popped up in kind of 2011. And then so for a lot of banks in New York and large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, that are the 3 largest asset management companies, control $20 trillion worth of assets, bigger than the GDP of the US, they started to try and repair their image, trying to adopt these European philosophies, again, ESG, DEI, stakeholder capitalism. And that really went on steroids, I think, in the 2016, 2017 timeframe when Trump was first elected. And you had a lot of progressive pension funds then put their money into BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, state of California, state of New York. European sovereign wealth funds invested into BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. And they started saying, if Trump is going to pull out of things like the Paris Climate Accords, if Trump is going to pull out of the Human Rights, UN Human Rights Coalition, if Trump is going to sign this Muslim ban, well, we all of a sudden feel that government is failing to solve these existential crises of climate climate change and or of immigration and of certain human rights issues. So we now want business to solve these issues. And so Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, wrote a very polarizing letter to all the CEOs of corporate America. And BlackRock is one of the largest shareholders in every single publicly traded company. But he essentially said that business now has to earn their social license. And this was in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, and that he was going to force companies to start adopting policies. And he helped evolve the purpose of a corporation from one of shareholder value and shareholder capitals, as Milton Friedman said, to this more European stakeholder capitalism model to satisfy more of these progressive pension funds and his European clients. So that really sort of set the stage where now CEOs were being compelled to speak out. And then really that went on. They got really put into turbo charge mode after COVID. During COVID, there was this existential crisis of COVID. And so companies got really pushed off their mission towards making political statements of COVID. George Floyd as well, I think, was another piece that really pumped this up as well, where all of a sudden companies were supposed to solve this crisis of systemic racism post George Floyd. You saw almost $200 billion was committed to the Black Lives Matter, for example, from CEOs. In the aftermath of that, even though even BLM was very controversial with some of their statements about destabilizing the nuclear family. And then, of course, that they were very supportive of Palestine and Hamas after Hamas attacked Israel. So they became a very controversial organization. But those two events, I mean, really, it's three events, I guess. Larry Fink, the involvement in stakeholder capitalism, COVID, and then George Floyd really got companies involved in a lot of social and political issues over the last couple of years.
We're speaking with Anson Frericks. He is the author of a new book called Last Call for Bud Light. It's right there. I highly recommend it. Gives you sort of a inside look at what went on in that company leading up to the Dylan Mulvaney disaster. Let's talk about that for just a second. We're running short on time, and I want to get to where Bud Light is and whether they've made a recovery. But first, talk for a second. I know you said, I think you left the company before, but I'm sure you had friends. I mean, what was your sense of what it was like inside that company as they watched, what was it, $20 billion of value wiped off the books in a matter of days and weeks as this thing just kind of spiraled out of control? It seemed like they were caught off guard and then, to your point, really didn't know how to respond.
No, you're right. And I mean, I'll even back up. A year before the Dylan Mulvaney partnership, I left the company. And one of the reasons I left was I was president of Anheuser-Busch sales and distribution in the US. And I tried to do a partnership with Black Rifle Coffee Company to distribute Black Rifle Coffee Company products in the same trucks that were carrying Bud and Bud Light. And our external affairs group and our legal team based in New York, they said I couldn't do it. And I said, why not? I mean, it makes tons of financial sense. We're going to make a lot of money. And they essentially said, this is too controversial. It's too political. Black Rifle Coffee said, why? I mean, their mission is to serve coffee and culture to firefighters, police officers, and people who love America. And they said, well, they've just gotten involved in too many kind of political issues. I said, that's crazy. So they killed this partnership. One of the reasons I left the company, because I thought that our group in New York didn't really understand the customer. And then a year later, so I mean, I wasn't really that surprised when that same group that killed the Black Rifle Coffee deal greenlit the Dylan Mulvaney partnership, because the company had adopted a lot of DEI commitments, diversity, equity, inclusion commitments, which they would report back to the BlackRocks and other asset managers, which would therefore include Anheuser-Busch and certain funds and ESG funds and others. So you kind of follow the money. And that's why the company was really caught, what I say, between a BlackRock and a hard place. The Dylan Mulvaney partnership didn't make any sense because Bud Light was always a brand that was non-political. It was about humor. It was about fun. It brought Americans together, enjoyed by Democrats and Republicans alike. I always say they never should have done a partnership with Donald Trump, or they should have done a partnership with Dylan Mulvaney. Just stick to doing partnerships with sort of just sports stars and kind of humorous, funny folks that are not politicized. Right. So that's why that partnership didn't make sense. But even the company, even afterwards, could never articulate about why they did the partnership with Dylan. They couldn't stand by Dylan, nor could they kind of apologize to their loyal customer base that was leaving them by the millions on a daily basis. And so we have, Bud Light's trying to sort of make a comeback, and they've hired Shane Gillis, who, is a funny dude, no question about it, but also, somewhat controversial. And he, I know he was just hosted Saturday Night Live again after being, they rejected him back in the day because he had said some things that were, off-color jokes or whatnot. And I also thought a key moment was when I saw that Dana White from the UFC came out in support of Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch and said, look, we're doing partnerships with them. They get America.
and anybody who thinks otherwise can just kind of pound sand. But so has Bud Light, has Anheuser-Busch, have they made a recovery? Will they ever be able to totally undo the damage that was done by that one single decision?
No, I mean, they haven't made a recovery really at all. So if you go back at this point, almost 2 years, Bud Light was the biggest beer brand in the United States. And since that happened, the first year, they lost about 30% of their Bud Light sales. They've been down about 10% last year, and they're trending this year down another almost 10%. So they're going to lose almost 50% of their sales on Bud Light in the last 2 years. The company in the United States used to do about $6 billion worth of profits. Now they're doing $4 billion worth of profits. Almost $2 billion of profits are gone. You mentioned this company lost over $20 billion of market share and market cap. The stock is still well below where it was before this controversy happened. The company has had to have fired thousands of employees. Suppliers have gone out of business. I mean, it's really sad where it is. And the one thing that I don't think Anheuser-Busch and some of the European board members and executives really get about the Americans, Americans are pretty forgiving. And yes, people like Dana White have come back to the brand, but Dana White got a $100 million check from the company. Shane Gillis gets millions of dollars of money. I think what the American population has not gotten is still sort of a formal just apology. And I always say, like, the path to redemption, it goes through forgiveness. But to be forgiven, you have to admit there was a mistake, and the company still has not done that. And so I don't think until the company admits there's a mistake that was made, the people will come back. And I also think at this point, it wouldn't even be genuine coming from the current administration. So my view is that since the company is European owned, foreign owned, they're actually better off probably almost selling the US business unit at this point, sell it back to, I don't know, Warren Buffett, or sell it back to some other American who can buy the brand back, talk that now it's in the hands of, once again, Americans with American values. We screwed up with what Bud Light did historically, but now moving forward, we now have the right people in charge, and who are going to get this brand back to greatness. And Americans love a great American comeback story. So I think they can do that, but I don't know if it's going to be under the current ownership.
All right, we will have to leave it there. Anson Frericks, author of the new book, Last Call for Bud Light. Anson, thanks for joining me. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Thomas. Really appreciate it.
That's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Everybody have a great night.